Greetings. Welcome to this interview series. My name is Christina Theodoraki. I'm editor of Small Business Economics and Entrepreneurship Journal, and I have the great honor to interview today Marcus Wolfe, who is Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship and Michael Price Professor of Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at the University of Oklahoma. Welcome, Marcus, and thank you very much for joining us to this interview series.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So Marcus is going to give us more insight from his article published in Small Business Economics entitled, "I Will Sleep When I Am Dead." The article is co-authored with Pankaj Patel from Villanova University. And starting my first question, I would like to ask you to tell us more about your article and what is your article about?
So in this article, we were really sort of fundamentally looking at the relationship between sleep and self-employment. And so, this notion of, sort of common anecdotal picture of the, entrepreneur burning oil to the middle of the night, working tirelessly on his business is a popular and sort of romanticized image. But we don't really have a lot of evidence in terms of empirical scholarly evidence about how self-employment really does relate to sleep. And so interestingly enough, from our finding, we have a number of studies in this paper, we actually find that self-employed individuals actually have better sleep in terms of both quality and quantity of sleep. And so kind of contrary to sort of the popular, notion that self-employed individuals are tirelessly working and slaving over their occupations, we actually find the contrary is true, that, because they maybe have more control, more autonomy, they tend to get better sleep than those who are employed. And kind of furthering upon that, we also actually find one way in which self-employment might negatively affect sleep is actually through psychological distress. And so situations related to self-employment that might increase an individual's level of psychological distress, that sort of mediated pathway does potentially have some negative impact on individual sleep. And then finally, we do find a small but significant correlation between the amount of sleep that self-employed individuals get and their income. And so I'm kind of tracking that back to sort of a financial benefit that can be gained from sort of increasing quality and quantity of sleep for self-employed individuals.
It's very interesting also to link the sleep and the self-employment and how probably sleep can affect the health of entrepreneurs and employment. So can you tell us more why your article is important and what do we learn from your article that we didn't learn before?
Yeah, well, I think that, the importance of the article really kind of ties back into sort of this surge in interest between sort of health and well-being and self-employment and entrepreneurship in general. We've seen a rise in, looking at sort of how mental and physical health and well-being are integral components to self-employment and entrepreneurship. And knowing how important sleep is to those characteristics, the need to understand sort of how self-employment relates to sleep, I think is something that plays an important part in sort of the overall health and well-being for individuals who are self-employed. And in terms of what we learn, I think that it's interesting when we learn that, this contrary notion that, entrepreneur or self-employed individuals, don't necessarily suffer from sort of this lack of quality and quantity of sleep. And so, particularly for individuals who are nascent self-employed or looking to maybe transition into self-employment, a lot of times, some of their concerns might be the worry about the long hours that it's going to take, the amount of time and how much it's going to consume their sort of overall quality of life. And so looking back at sort of the relationship, that a lot of information says that, self-employed individuals actually tend to have a higher quality of life than, transitioning. That one of the reasons might be that they actually do get more sleep or get better sleep in terms of that perspective. And so I think that's an important aspect for us to kind of understand, again, tying back into this whole notion of sort of health and well-being amongst individuals who are self-employed.
I was wondering, Marcus, if you sleep well, and actually the question is, how did you get the idea for this research? Where did this start?
Yeah, so I, interestingly enough, don't sleep that well. I'm not a great sleeper. And the idea actually came from my own experience. I was an entrepreneur before I came back to academia. And I definitely had some sleepless nights. There were some long nights, and there were some times where you have some inordinate amount of work that you have to do. But from my own personal experience, I never really, thought that my sleep patterns, even though I don't sleep well in general, I don't think that I never considered them as being worse when I was self-employed or was an entrepreneur than any of the other careers I've had, even in academia. And so that notion, that sort of disconnect to me was something kind of sparked my interest. Again, thinking about overall health and well-being, this notion that sleep is so important, and yet from my own personal experience, I didn't necessarily have a big discrepancy between the quality or quantity of sleep that I got when I was personally an entrepreneur, and most entrepreneurs that I know don't necessarily have, who have come from other careers, don't necessarily suffer from insomnia or excessive lack or deteriorating sleep when they move into self-employment.
It would be extremely interesting also to see, where do you see from your feedback and your observation, where do you see research going forward? Is there any new topics or any new ideas we're working on?
Well, I think that, related to the idea of sleep, I think, there's a lot that needs to be done. We look at generally self-employment as a classic categorization, but we have to realize there's a lot of nuance and variance in there that I think needs to be explored. Are there differences between sort of necessity versus opportunity? People who self-employ, are there differences between industries? So is it likely that, a high-tech entrepreneur might have some issues with sleep that aren't necessarily suffered from someone who maybe is engaged in artistic endeavors? And overall, is this relationship really linear? Are there diminishing returns to increased amount of sleep to the point where, is there a point where too much sleep actually does cut into your ability to be productive and to exert enough effort to self-employment endeavors to be successful and maintain performance? So I think there's a lot of nuances in this overall relationship that still need to be explored to sort of really kind of tease out the boundary conditions where, in general, yes, self-employment and sleep have a positive relationship, but there's going to be some finer grained points that I think need to be discovered from different perspectives.
You raised a very important issue about sleep and self-employment and how they impact the well-being of entrepreneurship also. The very important question is how we can apply these findings, who can apply them, what policies we can create based on that, who can be interesting, and how we can use it in entrepreneurship.
Well, I think, yeah, it goes back to sort of from a practitioner standpoint, again, this focuses in on one aspect of well-being that's very important. I think a lot of times, entrepreneurs are not well known for, focusing on individual health and well-being as components to their overall life satisfaction and their career success. And so, from a practitioner standpoint, this notion of making sure that you can disconnect, that you can step away from the business, that you do devote time and attention to something like sleep, because it is an integral part of your overall performance and your overall health and well-being. And so my notion, from a practitioner's perspective would be, look, the business is important, work is important, these are all integral components, but as our study shows, quality of life and quality of business performance are going to be overall improved if we can have a balanced perspective and take a more mindful view and realize that health and well-being are important components just as sort of business operation and business focuses are.
Definitely. And I believe also that beyond the sleep may affect the productivity and the profitability of the business, so they have a direct impact. I was thinking that probably also some insurance may be also interesting about the effects of sleep in the well-being of and the health of entrepreneurs, and how insurers can be also find these findings very interesting for their programs to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the idea of sort of the increased rise of interest in health and well-being in general, and the importance of health and well-being, whether it's mental or physical, I think sleep being an integral component to that. I think there are other aspects, everything from diet and exercise to sort of mental health and well-being. We're seeing a lot of rise in interest in sort of knowing that, it's not all about how well the business is performing. We have to look at these individual aspects because the individual is really a key component to the overall function of the success of the endeavor. And so taking that into perspective and adopting that point of view, I think is going to be very beneficial for us to sort of continue forward and look in sort of other interesting areas related to this field.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for this inspiring discussion. I think you opened the discussion, the research discussion, to a very interesting and promising topic. So I hope to see you in the future interviews. And for our listeners and readers, they can download your article from the website of Springer and Small Business Economics. Thank you very much, Marcus.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. And hopefully this is the beginning of another sort of fruitful topic of area of interest for researchers.